Hi guys, Freddy here. Welcome back to another retro RPG and the end of another poll. And the largest poll we've ever had, the most responses. So thank you to everybody who voted, it's very much appreciated. Now also thank you to everybody for keeping me on the edge of my seat, because it was a three-way tie for much of the week. Not only did we have the Federation Ship Recognition Manual, tied with Unknown Armies, but we also had the Slain role-playing game, receiving virtually the same amount of votes all through the week. Each one would go ahead at some point and then fall behind, until on Thursday night, Unknown Armies was ahead, so I dug it out and started looking through the rules, in preparation for making this video on a Saturday morning. But then we went into Friday, and things had changed again, and the eventual winner was the Star Trek Federation Ship Recognition Manual. So, thank you everybody for keeping me on the edge of my seat. It was an interesting surprise, and hopefully Unknown Armies will win a couple of weeks, so my time looking through the rules isn't going to be wasted. But anyway, so the Federation Ship Recognition Manual wins, and it gets removed from the poll as usual. And I've swapped it out and I've replaced it with the Drow of the Underdark book for Dungeons & Dragons 2nd edition, which is a book I'm pretty familiar with because I played a Drow throughout the 90s. So it's a book which I gave a lot of use to. And the loser in the poll this week, by a long margin, was Ramsey Campbell's Goatswood, Call of Cthulhu sourcebook, and one I actually really wanted to cover, so I'm a bit sad to see it go. Because it brings an interesting spin to Call of Cthulhu, bringing it up to date and bringing it to Britain, creating basically a fear of modern things. Street gangs, teenagers on street corners, things people fear today, rather than conspirators in the shadows of the 1920s. And I really like that, and I would have liked to have covered it. So I'm sad to see it go, but I'm swapping it out and I'm replacing it with the Heir to the Empire sourcebook for Star Wars, the first of the Thrawn books, which I know there's a lot of interest in these days, because Thrawn came back for Rebels, and he's been mentioned in The Mandalorian, so we'll probably be making a reappearance. So, I'd kind of like to cover that, but it's up to you guys now. But anyway, let's go over to the desktop and have a look at the Federation Ship Recognition Manual. So, this is the Federation Ship Recognition Manual for Star Trek the Role-Playing Game. Now, this is the 1985 version for the 2nd edition of the role-playing game, whereas there was another version came out in 1983 for the 1st edition. The 1st edition book was only 29 pages long, whereas this is a fairly light 42 pages. I'm afraid I don't have the 1st edition, so I don't know what the differences are, whether there's extra ships in this or whether they've just bulked out some of the information on the ships which are already within it. Now, this book came out between Star Trek 3 and 4. So there were only a few starships which had been officially seen. So we'd seen the Enterprise, of course, the Enterprise-class, we'd seen the Excelsior, we'd seen the Grissom, which is a Birth-class, and we'd seen the Reliant, which we now know to be Miranda-class, although within these pages it's called the Reliant-class. And we'd seen that many of those ships were basically kit bashes. So they'd taken elements of the Enterprise design, for example, and bolted them together in a different order to create the Reliant, adding a few little bits, but mainly it was using the same elements which made up the engine, the saucer, etc. And that's what a lot of ships within this book are. They take the designs out of the movies and they roll them back to the original series era to make contemporaries of the Constitution-class. But they also take the elements of the starships which we'd seen in the movies and assemble them into new ships, which is something which kind of carries on through Star Trek into the 90s, when Deep Space Nine was doing the Dominion War, so there were lots of starships flying around on screen. They did kit bashes as well. They took starships and reassembled them to make new classes. So this book was kind of prophetic in the way Federation starships would use the same design elements throughout them. Now, this book is cutaways, it's blueprints, that kind of stuff, which, as I mentioned before in videos, I absolutely adore. So I bought this book round about the time I got the role-playing game, but I probably would have bought it despite if I hadn't had the role-playing game at all, because I just adore having this kind of things, and I do like Star Trek. Let's have a look at the back cover then. Classified, Authorized Personnel Only. The Federation Ship Recognition Manual is intended for Starfleet personnel with a need to know concerning information on Starfleet vessels. This comprehensive study discloses all known combat, visual, and historical data on 42 different Federation ships and their variants. Also included is a chronology of service and silhouette recognition chart. This manual is a must for all Star Trek enthusiasts. Shown on the front cover is a cutaway view of the Remora-class 7 escort. Shown on the back cover are Scorpion-class 2 corvettes. Well, first of all, that looks like a Star Trek ship. It's got the saucer, it's got a recognizable engine, even though it's got these wing bits which do make it kind of Remora-like. But these don't. And that's an element that I dislike within this book, that a number of the starships used don't look like they belong in the Federation. So let's have a flick through. We've got introduction, role of Starfleet and the scope of this manual. Table of contents, and then we're straight into the ships. So we've got the Macon-class 7 assault ship. Can beam down its complement of 1,800 Marines, 9 heavy tanks, and 32 light support vessels in 25 minutes. So you can see it's got shuttle bays at the front and back there. We've got another assault ship, a large transporter ship. Doesn't look quite as Starfleet as the other one, but you've still got a few elements within that design. We've got the Excelsior as seen in the movies. Now, at this point, we didn't really know that the transwarp wasn't going to be a thing. So this mentions the transwarp, but keeps it as classified. We've got the Scorpio-class corvette off the back cover. Looks vaguely science fiction, very generic. Doesn't look very Star Trek. The Andor-class cruiser. Well, I really like this design. A few of these ships do this, where they put the warp nacelles grouped in behind the ship. So, in Star Trek, whenever you watch combat, the engines tend to get shot, and that cripples a vessel. Well, the idea of hiding them away, putting lots of ship in between the most vulnerable part of the vessel and the outside where people can shoot at them, makes a lot of sense. So, I like this design and a few of the others. Now, we can see the definite kit bashing here on the Anton-class. Now, this looks very much like an early version of the Reliant. We've got the same sort of saucer section and body on the back with the nacelles dropping below, although they are laid out slightly differently. But it's definitely kit bashed, because if you look from the top view, you can see the fins on the back of the nacelles. Whereas when we look on the side view, the engines are actually upside down. So they've obviously just cut and pasted them on to create a new designer ship. They're also very dark ink in comparison. Now, the descriptions, they obviously have the stats here for various versions of the vessels. And they've got some descriptive text. It mentions here, the last of which was refitting to the Reliant class. So these are supposed to be the ships which later become the Miranda-class, the Reliant, from Star Trek II. Another element I absolutely adore is the fact that we've got the Constitution-class ship here, but we've got the various editions. So, in the original pilot episode for Star Trek, phasers, which are so common in the Federation and in Star Trek, didn't exist. Everybody used lasers. So, this Mark I version of the Constitution is actually equipped with Federation laser banks, rather than having the phaser banks that the later versions have. And that's really quite nice, that if you want to have ships from Pike's period, obviously not the new Discovery version of Pike, but Pike as seen in the pilot episode, The Cage, you can use the stats here, and a number of ships will have that. We've got the Enterprise-class, so from the movies. I wish they'd used a photograph here instead of this artwork. It's nicely done, but the stretching out lights for going to warp do look a bit scratchy, and I'm not that impressed by the image. We've got the Reliant-class cruiser, so various versions of it, and it's not called the Miranda-class as we now know, because obviously at this time that information hadn't come out from official sources. Brenton-class cruiser, taking elements, so stretching the saucer out and putting a couple of nacelles on it. Durrett-class cruiser, I do like what they've done, taking the nacelle and dropping it down below, but keeping the torpedo bay in between. But they do it a lot better, and designs with just a saucer and a single nacelle are quite common throughout this book. We've got cutters, very different designs. The Baker-class destroyer, which I really like. It looks like it's got a lot of cargo space in there. I don't know what you would store in there, with the nacelles drop down below. I like that design. The Wilkerson-class destroyer. So we've got two nacelles, one top, one bottom, with the torpedo launcher on top. Again, it's very similar to some others, but I do quite like the look of it. Larson-class destroyer, so from the original series and then from the movie era, but all they seem to have swapped out is the nacelle. They haven't swapped out the saucer section. I would have liked to have seen a version of this where the saucer section was now the movie version. But again, it's a single-engine version of a Federation ship, which we're going to see several of before we're at the end of the book. In the text here, there's sort of descriptions of various ships and how they fought in battles. It really gives you a history of the class. Linthal-class destroyer, again with the nacelles behind. I do like the layout of this. The different views are quite cool. Thufa-class destroyer, again very similar to this, but using an Excelsior bridge section instead. Genser-class escort, looks a bit weird, but quite nice. Then we're on to some of my favourites. Griffin-class escort is nothing special. It's one of these very thin vessels with just Starfleet nacelles put on the side. The Remora-class escort from the cover looks very cool. It does look Remora-like or Manta-like. The nacelles very low behind the saucer. The Northampton-class frigate. I really like this design. There's some YouTube videos where people have animated this so the nacelles fold out for jumping to warp, and they are just stored in this configuration for combat to shield them. I do like the design though. It's kind of graceful and kind of weird. Definitely a ship of space, not planned to enter any atmospheres. The Chandley-class frigate, which has these large wing sections, which apparently are modular. So if you're using it to carry troops, then you bolt in troop training facilities. If it's carrying cargo, then you just bolt in cargo facilities. I like that from a modular design. It's a bit too wide though. Loknar-class frigate, again very similar, just a saucer section with some engines running off it, and again the original series type saucer section swapped out with a different nacelle. Babcock-class frigate, Kiev-class frigate, a Finland-class 5 monitor. Doesn't look anything like Star Trek really. I can see the circular airlocks on it, but this looks more like something out of Star Wars. A miniature Death Star of some kind. Nelson-class scout, again the saucer section with just one nacelle. Beta-class scout, looks really quite ugly. Keith-class scout, Ranger-class scout, which is getting a bit away from the Star Trek design elements. That saucer section could maybe be like the Aberth class, but rather weirdly the Aberth class isn't in here. Cochrane-class colonial transport for taking colonists out to different worlds. Aiken-class freighter. The Liberty-class freighter, which I really like the design of. The idea of a Federation ship, so the saucer and the nacelles just with huge cargo bays beneath. Makes a lot of sense. Kefkin-class transport. Mokal-class transport, which I'm guessing you dock on cargo pods onto there and it pushes them, which seems a bit weird. Warp shuttles, which don't really resemble shuttlecraft in Star Trek at all, so they're really deviating off the design elements. Durf-class tender, which again, saucer section, couple of nacelles, very common design throughout this book. Claydon-class 6 repair tender. The Pearl-class mobile repair facility, which I don't see the point of. I quite like the idea of it, taking a large dry dock facility, strapping a warp drive and a small cockpit area or crew area onto the side of it, and then flying it into conflict zones to repair ships. But why do you actually need to shelter ships inside a dry dock? They're still exposed to space. This really doesn't make much sense. It'd make more sense if tractor beams didn't exist in Star Trek to tow damaged ships, that you had to send this, you would load your damaged ship aboard, and then this would take it somewhere to be repaired. But as a mobile repair facility, it doesn't really make a lot of sense. And then we're on to the Alamo-class defense outpost, which is a version of the big starbase seen in orbit around Earth in Star Trek 3. I like the design. It does look very similar in design concepts to those star bases while being its own thing. Different fire arcs on it and a wee description of it. And then we've got the silhouettes. So the various ships, how to recognize them. Obviously the more common ships are detailed, but all the vessels from within it. And on the other side of that page, we have a timeline. So you can see what the stardate the Anton-class and the Constitution-class entered service, when they carried on and were phased out and replaced by later versions, and then onto other ships. It's kind of cool. Some of it doesn't make too much sense. We've got the Durf-class tender here, which uses the original series warp nacelles, entering service very, very late, long after we're onto the Enterprise-class and the Reliant-class, when the Federation apparently has started using different engines. But it's a nice book. Now, they also did the Romulan ship recognition manual and the Klingon ship recognition manual, which, given there were less ships to kit bash, did interesting jobs, but weren't quite as good as this one. This is the standout in the series. But anyway, I think I've gone on for quite long enough as usual. Thank you very, very much for watching. Please like, subscribe and comment below, as it does me massive favours with the YouTube algorithm. But most of all, as always, you look after yourselves, and I'll catch you later. Bye now.